Remember when a tiny desert speck became Omar Sharif on a camel? Lean's epic, with Peter O'Toole, Alec Guinness, and Maurice Jarre's sweeping theme, nearly fell apart before the premiere. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts you never knew about Lawrence of Arabia. Number 15. You have seen it 100 times. Lawrence blows out a match, and before the flame even finishes dying, the screen fills with the blazing desert sunrise. Film schools still show that cut. Critics still write about it. It is routinely called the greatest single edit in cinema history. Here's the thing, it was never supposed to exist. The original script called for a dissolve between those two shots, not a hard cut. The blunt transition was a placeholder, sitting in the rough assembly simply because optical dissolves were processed late in post-production. Editor Ann V. Coates and David Lean sat down to watch the assembly expecting to replace it. They didn't. Lean told Coates to take it away and make it perfect, and she trimmed exactly 2 frames off the match and kept the cut exactly as it was. What made Lean willing to accept something so radical? Coates had been introducing him to the French New Wave, and that influence opened his eye to what an aggressive cut could do. Coates reportedly still wasn't sure they were holding the incoming sunrise long enough until Jarre's score played over it, and, as Coates said, it seemed perfect. The most cited edit in cinema history was a production shortcut that 2 people were brave enough not to fix. And if the most praised moment happened by pure chance, the shot they spent months deliberately planning was an entirely different kind of gamble. Number 14. Sherif Ali's arrival is often described as the longest single-character introduction in cinema history. 4 unbroken minutes of a figure materializing out of a heat mirage. It is hypnotic. It also required a piece of technology built specifically for this scene and never used since. Cinematographer Freddie Young shot the sequence on a custom ultra-long telephoto commissioned from Panavision, designed and built by engineers Takuo Miyagishima and George Kramer. Young himself said the lens measured 500 millimeters. Panavision reportedly still has it, and calls it the David Lean lens internally. No production has requested it since, making this the only time that particular configuration of glass was built and used for a single scene. Getting the shot right required extreme precision on location. Production designer John Box sprayed a 2-foot white line across the sand to guide Omar Sharif's camel to the exact mark. Young reportedly disliked it and started kicking it away with his heel before filming began. Here is what makes it even more extraordinary. Lean later admitted he lost his nerve and cut the approach shorter than he had shot it. Lean said, "I had Omar coming out of the mirage at double the length. I wish I hadn't." The sequence was one continuous lens, one horizon, one figure, sustained entirely on faith. And the man who rode toward that lens was almost physically unable to stay in the saddle long enough to film it. Number 13. Watch the early riding sequences in Wadi Rum carefully. Lawrence and his men move across the dunes in flowing formation, and if you look at the saddles, you will notice pale cushions underneath many of the Bedouin riders. That was not a costume department decision. That was Peter O'Toole's solution to a very specific personal problem, and it spread across the entire set within days. O'Toole had never ridden a camel before production began. His first attempt in Jordan did not go well. He told his instructor, "This is a very delicate Irish arse," and blood reportedly soaked through his jeans. His solution was to go to a local market, buy foam rubber, and slip it under his saddle. The Bedouin extras laughed at first, then they copied him. According to Kevin Brownlow's biography, David Lean, the technique spread so completely that Bedouins on set gave O'Toole the nickname Abu Isfanja, meaning father of the sponge, and the trick became known around the production as the O'Toole. Sam Spiegel's diplomatic advisor, Anthony Nutting, reportedly told O'Toole directly, "You're the only actor we've got, and if you get bundled home, there's no film. You can spot foam peeking out from under half the saddles and frame during those Wadi Rum scenes, a prop department accident invented by the star to protect himself." O'Toole was the only actor in that saddle by the time filming began, with 2 bigger names already gone. Number 12. Lawrence of Arabia runs more than 3.5 hours in its restored form. It contains the fall of Damascus, the psychological unraveling of one of the 20th century's most complex public figures, and the entire sweep of the Arab Revolt. And across that entire runtime, not a single credited woman speaks one word. That makes it the only Best Picture winner in Academy history with no credited female speaking roles. Both that distinction and the film's record length were deliberate. Lean and screenwriter Robert Bolt pointed directly to T.E. Lawrence's own writing. In Seven Pillars of Wisdom, Lawrence described the Arab movement as containing nothing female but the camels. Lean took that as a structural principle. The jeweled woman's hand that appears briefly in one shot was not even a woman's hand. It belonged to second assistant director David Tringham. In 1989, Lean told the Washington Post that he had written the Lawrence and Ali relationship with a romantic dimension in mind. That intentional emotional register shaped the film's all-male world at every level. What gets overlooked is how many women drove the production from behind the camera. Costume designer Phyllis Dalton, continuity supervisor Barbara Cole, and editor Ann V. Coates were all central creative forces. Watch the Damascus Hospital sequence again. The only women visible are silent, absence by design. The deliberate choices only get stranger once you understand how little footage Lean had after months in the desert. Number 11. The Wadi Rum footage is the emotional heart of Lawrence of Arabia. The red sandstone formations, the vast open silences. Lawrence alone against an inhuman landscape. Those images almost did not exist. After 117 shooting days in Jordan, David Lean had produced approximately 45 minutes of usable footage. The production was in crisis. There was no local processing lab, so every reel had to be flown to London for developing. Lean was shooting blind for months with no feedback on whether what he was capturing was working. Columbia Pictures and producer Sam Spiegel panicked. Spiegel had frozen assets he could only spend in Spain, which made Almeria suddenly attractive as a secondary base. Lean fought the idea. He wrote furiously to Spiegel, "You won't touch this place for backgrounds. You can't beat Aqaba for Aqaba." He lost that argument. The desert that carries the film's visual identity is a patchwork. Jordan in the first hour, then Spain and Morocco standing in for everything that follows. The footage that every cinematographer has studied for 60 years was produced under crisis conditions, with no reliable feedback loop and a producer threatening to redirect the budget. Every Wadi Rum frame now carries the weight of 5 months of blind shooting. It is, by any filmmaking measure, one of the most uncertain foundations on which a classic has ever been built. And the Aqaba you remember was filmed somewhere else entirely. Number 10. The charge on Aqaba is one of cinema's great set pieces. Lawrence and his forces thundering across open ground, the sea appearing at the horizon, the sequence building toward one of the most triumphant arrivals in epic filmmaking. Not one frame of it was shot in Arabia. The real Aqaba had been modernized beyond any possibility of period filming. So, production designer John Box built it from scratch on Spanish soil. His crew constructed more than 300 false front buildings and a quarter-mile seawall over 3 months using 200 local workers. Palm trees were trucked in from Alicante. The charge involved 150 camels and 450 horses. On the very first day of Almeria shooting, a flash flood near Tabernas nearly destroyed the set and flooded Lean's caravan. During the charge itself, Peter O'Toole was thrown from his camel. The animal reportedly stood over him and shielded him from the stampede, eerily mirroring T.E. Lawrence's own fall at Abba el Lisan in 1917. Freddie Young captured the charge in essentially one take from a raised position. The thundering arrival at the sea was a Spanish beach, Spanish palm trees, and an Irish actor who nearly died making the shot work. John Box's construction was demolished the moment filming wrapped, leaving no physical trace of the most celebrated port siege in cinema history. The tensions between Lean and the man funding all of it would eventually make their way into the footage itself. Number 9. Lawrence of Arabia moves with complete serenity. Its pace is unhurried and confident. It feels like the work of a production entirely in control of itself. That is one of the great illusions in film history. Sam Spiegel spent most of the production sending furious cost cables from his yacht. When he did visit the set, the appearances were designed to unsettle. On one occasion, he arrived with director William Wyler in tow, an unmistakable signal that Lean could be replaced. On another, Spiegel reportedly flew in on a Red Cross helicopter on a stretcher, delivered a speech about the film mattering more than his health, then flew out. People who witnessed it believed the collapse was staged entirely for effect. Lean's response was to sneak a shot of himself making an obscene gesture towards Spiegel into the 70mm dailies. The logistics were equally extreme. Water had to be trucked in from a well reportedly more than 150 miles away. White plastic cups were banned from set because wind blew them into shots. 300 Bedouin extras swept sand with palm fronds between takes to erase footprints. Every frame of controlled, beautiful silence was captured against a backdrop of genuine personal warfare and logistical impossibility. And some of the people delivering that serenity were never supposed to be in the film at all. Number 8. Ali is the emotional anchor of the second half of the film. His scenes with Lawrence carry the weight of the entire story's moral argument. It is impossible to imagine the role belonging to anyone else. Turns out, it almost belonged to 3 other people first. Horst Buchholz was Lean's first choice. He was unavailable because Billy Wilder had him committed to 1, 2, 3. Alain Delon screen-tested successfully, but refused the brown contact lenses needed to mask his blue eyes. Maurice Ronet was actually cast and filmed around before being dropped over his French accent and difficulty with the costume. Bollywood legend Dilip Kumar was approached and declined outright. Omar Sharif had not been cast as Ali at all. He was originally hired to play Tafas, the minor Bedouin guide shot at the well in the film's opening. He was promoted to Ali only after Ronet was released. Zia Moyedin took the Tafas role instead. Sam Spiegel secured Sharif an Egyptian exit visa. Sharif had been unable to obtain himself, then signed him to a 7-picture deal at $15,000 per film. O'Toole, deciding that no one could possibly be called Omar Sharif, called him Freddie for the entire shoot. That 4-minute entrance carries the history of 4 failed attempts in every frame. Knowing that, the quiet dignity Sharif brings to every confrontation with Lawrence carries the weight of a role that was never meant to be his. Alright, we're at the halfway mark. Before we hit the top 7, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Lawrence of Arabia quote or moment? Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel grow. Number 7. Jackson Bentley is the outsider's eye in Lawrence of Arabia, the American journalist who translates Lawrence's story for the Western world. Every scene he appears in was filmed under emergency conditions because the actor who originated the role suffered a heart attack on desert location. Edmund O'Brien, the 1954 Oscar winner for The Barefoot Contessa, was cast as Bentley. He filmed the Jerusalem scene and Bentley's early political exchanges before collapsing on location. Arthur Kennedy was flown in as an emergency replacement. According to Omar Sharif, Kennedy was reportedly recommended to Lean by Anthony Quinn, and the connection between them was direct. Kennedy had replaced Quinn as Henry II in the Broadway production of Beckett the year before. Kirk Douglas had been considered earlier, but walked when Sam Spiegel refused him star salary and billing above O'Toole. O'Brien survived, recovered, and returned to work that same year on The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and Birdman of Alcatraz. Every Bentley scene in the finished film is a salvage operation. The character was half filmed by one actor and completed by another who joined a production already running on emergency protocols. Watch Kennedy's performance knowing he arrived with no runway and a character someone else had already started building. Another performer joined for even less screen time and walked away with considerably more money than anyone else in the cast. Number 6. The interrogation sequence at Dira A is 5 minutes long, built around a performance of sustained, devastating restraint. It cost more per minute of screen time than almost anything else in the entire production. Jose Ferrer turned the role down initially because of its size. He signed only after Sam Spiegel offered him roughly $25,000, plus a factory new Porsche, a package that reportedly exceeded the combined salaries of both Peter O'Toole and Omar Sharif. O'Toole was locked into a 7-year Spiegel contract with limited negotiating power, which made that comparison all the more pointed. Ferrer later reflected on the work with rare directness, saying, "If I was to be judged by any one film performance, it would be my 5 minutes in Lawrence." O'Toole said he learned more about screen acting from Ferrer during that sequence than in all his years at drama school, a significant statement from a man who would go on to receive 8 Academy Award nominations. The Dera sequence also sits at the center of unresolved historical debate. Historians Jeremy Wilson and John Mack defend Lawrence's account of what happened there. Michael Asher and Lawrence James argue he invented it. The film presents it without judgment, which makes Ferrer's performance even more unsettling in retrospect. 5 minutes, more expensive per frame than almost anything around it. The score underneath it was composed in less time than most directors spend on pre-production. Number 5. Maurice Jarre's Lawrence of Arabia theme is ranked 3rd on AFY's 100 Years of Film Scores. It is the sound of cinematic ambition, the musical shorthand for epic scale. It was composed in 6 weeks by a man who got the job because everyone else had said no or collapsed. Malcolm Arnold, who had scored the bridge on the River Kwai, reportedly declined. William Walton declined. Sam Spiegel then attempted a three-composer arrangement pairing Benjamin Britten for British themes, Aram Khachaturian for Arab themes, and Jara. Khachaturian was blocked from leaving the Soviet Union. Britain demanded 18 months, which was impossible. Richard Rogers was briefly hired. David Lean called his demos rubbish after Rogers submitted them without having watched a single frame. Jara submitted his own theme and was hired. He composed the entire score in roughly 6 weeks before the December 10, 1962 premiere. Sir Adrian Boult was brought in to conduct, then withdrew when he realized the score had to sync to picture. Jara conducted the London Philharmonic himself, while Spiegel insisted Boult's name remain on the titles for prestige. Boult was credited for a recording session he did not actually conduct. The theme that defined cinematic epic music was written under crisis conditions by a composer who was essentially the last option available. It launched Jara into every subsequent Lean collaboration. The man who needed that music to work was himself, almost not in the film at all. Number 4. Peter O'Toole's Lawrence is now so completely the definitive version of the role that imagining anyone else playing it requires a genuine act of imagination. The blue eyes against the white robes, the physical fragility, the ambiguity, all of it feels inevitable. None of it was. The New York Times announced Marlon Brando in the role. Then a second actor spent 4 days being tested before also walking away. The Times reported Brando's casting on February 18, 1960. He departed because he did not want to spend 2 years riding camels, while he still had Mutiny on the Bounty to finish. Lean pivoted to Albert Finney, then largely unknown. The screen test Finney completed over 4 days cost roughly £100,000, with full sets, costumes, co-stars, and more than 1,400 feet of widescreen color 35mm footage. That test is preserved at the British Film Institute. Finney turned the role down rather than sign Sam Spiegel's 7-year contract, later telling The Independent he feared being trapped. Anthony Perkins and Montgomery Clift were both briefly considered. Lean spotted Peter O'Toole in John Gillerman's The Day They Robbed the Bank of England, reportedly aided by a recommendation from Katharine Hepburn. After O'Toole's single-day test, Lean said, "No use shooting another foot of film. The boy is Lawrence." O'Toole signed the same 7-year contract Finney had refused. Everything you understand about the film's emotional texture came from a signature on a contract the previous lead was unwilling to put his name on. Number 3. The opening titles of Lawrence of Arabia credit Robert Boult for the screenplay. For most of the film's history, that credit was incomplete. The man who built the film's structure was erased by the Hollywood blacklist and died before his contribution was officially acknowledged. Michael Wilson was blacklisted in 1951 after refusing to name names before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Sam Spiegel hired him quietly to write the screenplay. Wilson delivered 3 complete drafts and the 1958 treatment titled Elements and Facets of a Theme. He built the structural arc, created composite characters like Dryden and Bentley who do not exist in T.E. Lawrence's original writing, and established the dramatic logic of the entire story. Lean found Wilson's approach too academic and brought in playwright Robert Boult, whose credits included A Man for All Seasons. Boult rewrote virtually every line, including Nothing is Written. The screenplay audiences heard was Boult's voice built on Wilson's bones. Boult was separately arrested in September 1961 during a campaign for nuclear disarmament sit-down. Spiegel persuaded him to sign a pledge to get the unfinished script completed. Boult regretted that decision and reportedly never spoke to Spiegel again after the film wrapped. Wilson died in 1978. The Writers Guild restored his co-credit on August 2, 1995. The on-screen credit was not digitally added until Sony's 2002 restoration. Wilson shaped the skeleton. Boult shaped the voice. Neither name alone tells the full story. Number 2. Prince Faisal arrives in the film as the measured, dignified conscience of the Arab world. Calm authority contained in every gesture. Alec Guinness built that performance with such precision that people who had personally known the real Prince Faisal could not distinguish the actor from the man. Laurence Olivier had originally been cast as Faisal, but dropped out to honor a commitment to the Chichester Festival Theatre. Guinness himself had played T.E. Lawrence on stage in Terence Rattigan's Ross, but was considered too old at 46 for the lead role. His preparation drew on historical sources and reportedly on conversations with Omar Sharif, whose Arab-inflected English Guinness worked to understand and absorb. According to Guinness's own diaries, acquired by the British Library in 2013 and confirmed by his biographer Piers Paul Reed, people on the Jordan location who had personally known the late Prince Faisal believed they were looking at him when they saw Guinness on set. Anthony Quinn's transformation as Auda Abu Tai was so complete that David Lean initially mistook Quinn in full makeup for a Bedouin extra and asked to hire him. While all of this was happening, King Hussein of Jordan was visiting the production regularly enough that he met a young British secretarial assistant named Antoinette Gardner on set. They married in 1961. Their son is King Abdullah II of Jordan. The version those audiences were watching, though, was not the film anyone intended to make. Number 1. The Lawrence of Arabia you know today is not the version that circulated for most of the film's history. For the better part of 3 decades, the film Lean had spent years making did not exist in a watchable form. The world premiere on December 10, 1962, ran 222 minutes at the Odeon Leicester Square before Queen Elizabeth II. Editor Anne V. Coates personally raced to Heathrow Airport days earlier to retrieve a backup 70mm print after the first was scratched. Under commercial pressure, Lean trimmed 20 minutes for the February 1963 wide release, dropping the runtime to 202 minutes. The 1970 to 1971 re-release cut it further to roughly 187 minutes. Lean later publicly blamed Spiegel for the gutting after Spiegel's 1985 death. Initial reviews were mixed. Bosley Crowther in the New York Times called it exhausting and barren of humanity. Preservationists Robert A. Harris and Jim Paynton began restoration work in 1987 with Lean supervising. The 216-minute director's cut premiered in February 1989. Living cast members returned to redub missing audio, and Charles Gray dubbed the late Jack Hawkins as Allenby. That restoration lit the spark for modern film preservation. Steven Spielberg, who saw Lawrence at age 13 in Phoenix and has called it the film that made him want to direct, later helped fund the 2000 restoration alongside Martin Scorsese. Every frame you watch today exists because a handful of people refused to let a masterpiece stay buried. Lawrence of Arabia overcame a blacklisted writer, a replacement leading man, a fourth-choice supporting star, a 6-week score, a fake Aqaba, a faked heart attack, and 27 years of a butchered cut before the film Lean intended finally existed in full. The match cut was a lucky accident. The Mirage entrance required a lens never used since. The charge on Aqaba was a Spanish beach. None of it was certain. All of it became immortal. The production chaos is invisible in every frame, which is its own kind of genius. If this video surprised you, drop your favorite fact in the comments, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves this movie as much as you do. And as always, nothing is written. We'll see you next time.